Today in your notebook, we are going to be focusing on George Washington's presidency. That is page 41, George Washington, page 43, Hamilton's financial plan, page 44, Whiskey Rebellion / his farewell address. We are going to be moving over to those now. I will allow time for you to write these in your notebook. Okay. Now I'm giving you time to write. This can be paused at this time. I'm going to explain Washington's problems. Washington first took office in 1789 once our Constitution was officially approved or ratified, and he will be obviously our very first president. Now, being the first president, he has lots of problems to face and problems that he didn't understand or have anybody to look to as an example of what to do with these problems. Some problems he had to face were mostly because of the Articles of Confederation. First, he had to define authority of central government. How much power does he have? How much power does the legislative branch have? How much power does the judicial branch have? Do we have a judicial branch yet? All because of, in the articles, we don't have all of these branches working together. We mostly just have the legislative branch making their laws. He has to figure out how to pay off our war debt. We are in a lot of debt. We were borrowing money from Spain, borrowing money from France, really trying to defeat the English to gain our freedom. Yes, we gained our freedom. However, because we gained our freedom, we are also in an immense amount of debt. And Washington doesn't know how to recover from that. Tied to the debt, he has to figure out how to create a stable economic system inside of the U.S. Are we going to have a national bank? Are we going to gather everybody's money into one big stockpile and use it as a country? Are states going to try to fix their own debt? We're trying to separate ourselves from the Articles of Confederation, which caused us to be very segmented, not working together. And Washington's hopes were to bring everybody together and create a stable economic system as a whole. At the same time, in our articles, we couldn't force conscription or draft among anybody, so he had to figure out how to build a military, have people want to join the military, whether it just be volunteer or actually by making people join. We also have to figure out how are we going to maintain national security? How are we going to keep this young country safe? How are we going to make sure that we are making the military strong and making our country strong while also dealing with all the other problems? We have to also figure out how to set up a court system, because in the articles we did not have a judicial branch, and then this will ultimately lead to the Supreme Court or the judicial branch being set up. Quiz time. Who was America's very first president? I'm going to give you time to answer that, though we should all know it by now. George Washington. And then here is your EQ. So you're going to write this down as well on your notebook. What was one problem Washington faced as a president? Now I'm going to give you time to turn and talk with your partner about this, so this moment can be paused. Okay. Washington is doing something for the very first time. That means to set an example. So most of what he would do would set up a precedent for future presidents, even things that we have now. So Washington is going to set up a use of domestic force. Remember, domestic means at home. So he is setting up forces to use at home. How can we use our military in our own country? That is something we still are dealing with today. I'm sure there's many examples that you can think of. He also has to set up his executive cabinet. So those are going to be the people that really help Washington. They give him his advice about different things. He has a 2-term limit, so you cannot be president more than twice. And he does that because of the problems we had faced with the king. He's also going to proclaim neutrality. That means don't choose a side. You stay neutral amongst other countries. You kind of keep our nose out of other countries' businesses. We don't need to be there. We need to focus on America and making America a strong, safe country when we hadn't had that before. And then he's also going to set up the Supreme Court in 1789. We will also be taking a look at that Supreme Court case as well. At the same time, Washington is also going to enact the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. We will be coming back to this. This is to seize and return escapees to their owners and jailed anyone who helped in their escape. Now this is more so we are noticing a shift inside of our country, right? We had started to talk about, hey, maybe slavery isn't good. The South is really defending it. The North is like, we don't have a need for it. And so while we're talking about the North not having a need for slavery, they were kind of focusing on getting rid of it. The South was not happy with that. So Washington, to make everybody happy, to act as a union, one united, and placed the Fugitive Slave Act. So it would really help the people down south. If a slave was to escape, they would be brought back down. And if you helped somebody escape, then you would also face consequences. So you're going to talk to your elbow partner about what does the word precedent mean. And your second EQ of today, what was one precedent that Washington set for future presidents? Give some time to pause and answer that in your notebook. Okay, so this will be on page 43. This is all about Hamilton's financial plan. Washington's biggest problem when he took office was that the nation was in terrible debt. We had been acquiring this over some time throughout our war, and then we were borrowing money per the Articles of Confederation, though we had no stable system to pay people back. Now, inside of Washington's cabinet, we have Alexander Hamilton. He is the Secretary of Treasury, so he is going to be the guy that deals with all the money. It's also Washington's right-hand man, so it kind of helped out in that sense. He is going to come up with a plan to help the U.S. financially. So it's going to be all about repaying the debt, establishing a national bank. He's going to tax whiskey and create a protective tariff. Now, Hamilton's going to focus on repaying the national debt because we don't want to be a country in debt, right? That's not a good look for us. We also need to figure out just how to create a stable economic system in our country if we are going to continue our country as we would hope to, right? The way he was going to repay this debt was establishing a national bank. So this means that all states would pay their taxes. It would go to this national bank. And as a nation, we could reach in and grab money as needed, more so than it just being a statewide thing, right? Like every state's working on their own versus working together as a country. The way he was mostly going to kind of gain this money was to tax whiskey. Now, we use whiskey at this time for lots of different things. And most importantly, whiskey is made from grain. So he was taxing grain farmers, and we're going to see this kind of develop just like Shays' Rebellion, right? Like these grain farmers are not going to be happy that they are being taxed heavily once again. Now, Hamilton's idea was, do we necessarily need whiskey? No, right? And so if you really wanted it that bad, then you were willing to pay the tax on this item. And he's also going to create a protective tariff. Now, as we have established, tariff means tax. So he's creating a protective tax. We're going to take a look at what that looks like now. So if you see this is a protective tariff, it is going to raise price on imported goods. So goods that are coming into the country. The reason why we would do this is because we are trying to stay away from using England's factories and start making things inside the US, right? So if we were going to, for example, buy a pair of socks from England, those socks might have cost $1 in England, but because we have this protective tax, protects the US system, it's actually going to now cost $3 to stop us from buying things outside the country versus a $2 pair of socks in the US already, right? We're trying to gain our own independent system for making our own things. We were relying pretty heavily on England. However, once we kind of severed that connection with the war, we were really struggling to build up our own country. So, once again, we really don't want to be buying goods from outside the country because it's going to cost more than if we were just to make them inside our own country. So, I'm going to give you time to do your elbow partner. Who did Washington choose to come up with an economic plan? And then this is your EQ. Why did Hamilton decide to pay off America's debt instead of ignoring it? I'm going to give you time to answer that. This can be paused now. Okay, so this is now going to be on page 44. This is your Whiskey Rebellion. Now, like I said, when these farmers are going to be taxed, Hamilton placed that tax on whiskey to make money, they're going to be upset. We have already seen this with Shays' Rebellion. These farmers are really upset that this is taking place. And it really challenged federal government saying, can you actually tax the people the way you want? The farmers did not have the cash to pay the tax, and so they started this uprising, this rebellion. And they're thinking back to just a few years ago when they had Shays' Rebellion and nobody could stop them. We didn't have a president. We didn't have, really anybody to take force. There was no military. And so they're thinking, hey, if we protest, we have this rebellion, maybe we will have some change. Maybe we'll have another change that benefits us this time. However, Washington is setting this precedent, and he is actually going to use his own military that he has started to create as a domestic force, which means he has now used his power against his own people, right? He is showing that he is not somebody to be messed with, that we now have somebody in charge, we have a leader, and so you need to listen to that leader. This is not just like a free-for-all anymore. We are a country that is coming together, and it might not be great for you right now as a farmer, but we all have to work together to get out of this debt as a nation so we can start off somewhere better. Are the farmers happy about that? No, right? They don't want Washington to stop them. They don't want Washington to send his army to restore order. But they don't have another choice to make a difference other than listening and surrendering to Washington's army. However, this has spanned a lot of Washington's presidency, and he's going to start to realize, hey, I don't need to keep doing this. I don't need to be president forever, or then I am becoming a king. And so then Washington starts this idea of having a farewell, a goodbye. You're going to have your quiz time. So your elbow partner, why did the farmers not like the whiskey tax? I'll give you time for that. And your EQ. How did Washington get the farmers to stop their violent protests? Give you time for that. Okay. And so, like I was saying, Washington has decided, hey, I've had enough. I've spent my time here. I don't want to be a king. And so he is going to serve his 2 terms, and he is going to write a letter to the American people called his farewell address. Now, in this farewell address, he was like, hey, everything's so great. Love the country. We're on a good road, except for if you do these 2 things, which is start political parties or create permanent foreign alliances. He believed creating political parties would divide the nation in 2 and ultimately cause a war down the line. As you can guess, we started political parties almost exactly after Washington was out of office. And it will ultimately have an effect of war later on down the line when we get to the Civil War. Washington is also going to say, hey, don't permanently tie yourself to another country. You shouldn't stay just friends with France. You shouldn't stay just friends with England. You need to keep your nose out of other people's business. Now, this permanent foreign alliance will also be kind of talked about as well, right? We are going to have permanent foreign alliances. We are going to work with other countries, but it kind of is going to depend on who is president and who they agree with our permanent foreign alliances. So then we start to get in between where Washington was warning us, you're going to create a divide in the country that you cannot fix. And that's what we're really going to battle with in the next presidencies. Your last quiz for Washington's presidency. Elbow partner, what was Washington's goodbye letter to the American people called? Give you time to answer that with your partner. And your last EQ for Washington, why did Washington not want the American people to develop political parties? Okay, and I will see you in the next one about where we do develop political parties.